Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Anarchist Experience. My name is Robert Kruger. I am your host. Today we will be having our guests. I have Cody Limbaugh, one of the people who also joins me on the um, Voluntary Virtues flagship show, um, having Google Hangout and just talking about various different things and guests and so on. How are you doing, Cody?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'll lay off the coffee a little bit from our last show. I think I jumped in a little hot last time. A little less coffee.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for having me, though.
And then we will be having, of course, Daniel Rothschild. He will be joining us later on. He's going to be a little bit late. Um, and what we're going to be doing today is discussing a debate between Victor Pross and Wayne Simmons that occurred on the Voluntary Virtues Network in the Voluntary Virtues Normals time slot. And right now we have Victor here with us, and we will be expecting Wayne to join in shortly. And to get things started, I just kind of wanted to ask um, Victor what he thought about the after-hours discussion that we had following the debate. What we were saying and things like that. Did you get a chance to watch that, Victor?
Yes, I did. I did watch that for sure. Yeah, I know that there's a lot that have said it and included and where I fell short on this and that, but my mind was razzled with the tech problems, and of course, if for the 2-hour show, there's other people are speaking and whatnot, and there's a lot of different critiques and counterattacks that I could have took.
Yep.
But they don't all swing to mine at one time, of course, right?
Mhm.
So, I know people might have their favorite rebuttals to standard arguments that they may have have encountered where I fell short in doing that. So, it becomes a situation of where, why didn't he say that? Well,
Yeah.
I didn't. I was offering some other argument instead.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Well, if the backseat driving kind of thing always happens whenever people are talking about debates in this type of you know, one-on-one kind of thing. What pops in your mind at the time, great, you're going to say it, and it's going to come out, and you're just going to discuss it. But then later on, you might have thought, well, you know what, I could have approached that in a different way. Um, in the debate itself, when you were discussing things with Wayne, you know, how do you feel that went? Is there any particular points that you felt that you wanted to say that you didn't say, or were there things that you felt that his argument could have been stronger? Um, any particular critiques or commentaries on either side?
yeah, yeah, no, well, basically, I think everybody would agree that you know, Wayne does bring to the table gray matter. He is not Helfeld, right? So he's done his homework, and he reads a lot, and he thinks a lot. He lives and breathes philosophy, and so I commend him on that. But when I'm trying to, there was one part that was kind of like getting a little bit irritable, to tell you the truth, when I was trying to peg him down on Rand's position on taxation. I wanted to talk about the principle of taxation and where Rand.
Oh, we're losing you. Well, it looks like Victor's internet connection is living up to its usual, not very, I don't know, guaranteed to work, irregularities. So let's hopefully get Victor back on there. You still on there with me, Cody? Cody? Hello? Okay, we lost you there, Victor. Where were you?
Hello there, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. I don't know how much you
Just start
there's
over.
problems with my computer.
Just go ahead and start over.
Are you still with me?
Yeah, you started. You said that you got a little bit irritated with an issue, so that's where you ended off. You still there? Okay, well, looks like we're all experiencing some technical difficulties there. Let's go ahead and put that on there. And I'll try to re-invite everyone. If you're joining us on the YouTube channel, I do apologize for the technical difficulties. Apparently, we had an outage at the moment, but looks like we're getting it fixed up. Cody is jumping in, and looks like Wayne
Hello
is.
there.
Hello, Wayne, and we're waiting for Victor to jump back in.
Okay.
And
I can't do
figured out it was my connection that was screwing up there. I had a big download going on in the background apparently, and
Okay.
so that was my fault. Sorry about that.
No problem. I was sitting there going, "What's going on? About to join. About to join."
Yeah. All right. Well, Victor will be joining us here just in a second. Did you have a chance to watch the Voluntary Virtues After Hours discussion of the debate?
Yes, yeah, I did. I obviously I have some serious issues of being called a statist.
Okay. So go ahead and give us your impressions of the discussion afterwards.
Well, I mean, I've heard some of these discussions before over the years, right? I was at ISIL in 2000, met a lot of libertarians over the years, so I've heard the anarcho-capitalist argument going back a long ways, right? So we're back on, if you remember the news group, what it's called now, Humanity's Philosophy Objectivism, HBO. It was pretty big. David Friedman was on there. So I've heard the arguments many times. So I mean, when you guys were discussing my contributions, I found that you guys were giving a short shift to my arguments. Really, I mean,
okay.
I don't think you were really looking at everything that's the position that I hold. You're looking primarily at Victor's position,
okay,
and not at mine.
All right, and as far as the arguments that you were giving, the primary one is that you believe that the institution of government would be necessary to maintain a final arbitration point.
Well, I see that's the crux of the issue is lawmaking, not the actual enforcement of the law. I mean, there's lots of you have private. You could go to any type of organization in the U.S. to different security forces and stuff in the United States.
Right.
Private security. I mean, I think the issue that you guys don't wrestle with and evade a lot is lawmaking itself. Like, who's to decide what should be legal or illegal? You guys never answer that. It's just to me, and I think Victor is wrong, dead wrong. I think anarchism is a total repudiation of objectivism in its entirety, because objectivism is about the objective facts, right? I mean, it's in terms of how should human beings live among each other in a society, and as I was pointing out, I'll just roughly state it. I mean, in the Enlightenment period, you had a cosmopolitan view. You had a view that was there was an integrative view objectives talk about integration, right? So integration of ideas in the United States, in Western Europe, about what freedom is, what individual rights are. Just rough, sort of a rough understanding of it. But it was a general philosophical climate during the Enlightenment, a cosmopolitan time. And then in the 19th century, you had a breakdown of that with the Romantic period. And then in the 20th century, what you have now is social subjectivism in the universities, which is promoted by the counter-enlightenment in Germany. It's not just the schools. There was something that was stated. Someone made the comment, I don't know who it was, that said, I was just referring to the American schools as complete distortion of my position. My position is a lot deeper than that. I think that these ideas, and I think that anarchism lends itself very well to the social subjectivism of postmodernism and that sort of thing. And then, and you've never answered the question, you cannot answer the question about how you determine, who determines what is illegal or illegal, because you need to know, people need to know what to do in a situation where two justice agencies differ on what the law should be. And then if you put the issue isn't, to me, the issue you have is choice. If everything is about choice, but then you're the one that made the analogy about you have to marry my daughter. You can't make any other choices, but as if that was my position. Well, the position comes right back at you, because if I was advocating for a Rousseauian view, sort of this idea of leftist, sort of that property rights are a form of initiation of force, then I would argue that my rights are violated under that particular view, right? So you're arguing for a particular perspective, right? And you want to have that enforced in law. But if you as soon as put the issue of choice, you want to rip choice from its context as a stolen concept and use it as if you could just have choice in a particular way. But choice is, once you've let the genie out of the bottle, the pregnant hypothesis will bring about tons of Rosemary babies in the culture. In the sense of all these epistemologies, all these epistemological views, where they'll want to enforce them by law, and I can't see why they can't.
Okay, so the question then comes
down to the one question I'll ask again. Is in a situation where it's lawmaking. It should be lawmaking, not the actual provision of law, but the lawmaking. Yeah. Who decides what is legal or illegal in an anarchist society? Who decides? I want you to answer that. Who decides?
Okay, my response would be the same people who decided what maritime law was.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, well, maritime law didn't have any sort of rule maker called the king, or any specific judge that said these are going to be the laws. It didn't follow Hammurabi's code. It didn't follow any particular code. And the reason why was because everybody was out there on the high seas and had to interact with each other out of bounds of where the rule of law was set in various different countries. Right. Now, in those particular cases, what would happen is that you would have a negotiation between various different trading routes and trading partners and businessmen who were involved with running ships for trade, transporting goods and so on, and they created their own rules to interact with each other, and these became normalized. It's the same way that the rules of language end up being created through this.
Oh, this is social subjectivism. I get it. So you'll have Mike Rector, who advocates that rights are a social construct. Thank you very much, Mike, for being a godsend to my argument. And you have Victor Pross, who argues that rights are a moral concept based on our nature as human beings, an objectivist perspective. Victor has thrown himself in with a bunch of anarchist subjectivists and thinks that you can actually have. This is why Victor is wrong.
I argue
anarchy is pure subjectivism.
It's not subjectivism. It is not subjectivism.
It is totally subjectivism.
No, it is not.
How are you denying that? You have Mike Rector.
Let me explain.
In the comments section, stated quite clearly, rights are a social construct. Mike is a perfect example. How are you going to determine if
And I explained that he
How
was
are you going to make a decision what rights are, what's legal or illegal? You're totally evading the question. You've answered perfectly though, in a way, because you've stated that it's going to be an agreement, a shared common opinion about what's going to be legal or illegal.
agreements.
And that's not what should be determining what legal or illegal is. It is not about that. It's about the violation of life, liberty, and property.
It's actually a variety of agreements, but what I'm saying is not that it's subjective at all. What I'm saying is that what is the actual law is determined through a system of price controls. Basically, the price mechanism also works when it comes to law, in that if it becomes over, let's say for example, if we wanted to make the punishment for rape murder, that we would kill the person if they committed rape. Okay, we can see economically that the result of that is that we see more deaths of rape victims. Okay, so we've got increased losses there. Okay, then we also have the additional costs of lawsuits for people who.
Some would argue that rape is not. It depends on who's going to be determining what rape is. If you asked Catherine McKinnon, or if you had advocate or those who are of the radical feminist variety, they'd argue that rape is if you have sex with a woman in this culture. I mean, this is basically the argument that Andrea Dworkin made, right? So, I mean, how do you?
You're going to have people that are going to have certain argumentation that's going to be ludicrous and ridiculous, and the bottom line is that if you wanted to have your particular arbitration firm,
Dworkin was a professor, and so you had Catherine McKinnon, who was a legal scholar. And so you have these particular views in the culture. You guys are subjective.
Concept.
There is no common cause between objectivists and subjectivists. Victor's wrong. It is subjectivism. I can't see why you can't see it. It's pretty obvious to anybody that spends any time.
You're interrupting me, so I'd like to finish my thought.
Fine,
all right.
Go ahead.
All right. In the case of where somebody is got their subjective value on law, and they say that any interaction of a sexual nature between a man and a woman, where there is any sort of power differential, is automatically rape, and they want to have that be their particular codification within their business model for their rights DRO. Then they have to pay the difference in cost for their DRO to deal with other DROs that have a different perspective. And because of their repeat business that they're going to have, you have the costs of the various positions jockey back and forth for position as far as which one is economically viable.
It's a ludicrous idea. It's saying that consensual sex among a man and a woman is a form of rape is a ludicrous idea and should be dismissed out of hand. End of story. I wouldn't entertain it in any way. It's not an economic argument. It's a moral argument, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to say that consensual sex between a man and a woman is a form of rape, right? But you have radical feminists who argue for all types of perspectives. Yeah, they would have their defense agency, and maybe there would be a situation where they wouldn't be able to impose their view in the extreme, because most people would see a more of a moderate perspective. But then it's, to me, you know, what are you going to moderate? How are you going to come to a particular midway point on a particular issue?
I think, Robert, and correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but I think what he's saying here is that he agrees with you that that's a ludicrous position to take, and that because it's such a ludicrous position and such a minority of people who would hold that position, that they would be pushed out of the marketplace of law. So
not totally,
because it would be so cost prohibitive for them to try to enforce that law on other people, that they would be unable to do so, when the vast majority of people are disagreeing with them and are able to enforce their law more consistently at a much lower rate, because the market has determined that that's the best way to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the burden of trying to imprison a person for having consensual sex, okay, when there's only 20 of you, let's say for example, 20 of these feminists who have this position, the trying to take 100% of the burden of trying to do that activity upon themselves is prohibitive. There is no way in the world that they will actually be able to grab this person, haul him off, and put him into a cage when he's got himself and everybody else who doesn't agree with this stupid idea.
Well, can I speak, Robert? I mean, I don't know if you know, but Warren Farrell's speech in Toronto in November of 2012, I believe, and I was on my birthday, nevertheless. It was November 16th. And what was interesting is that there was a huge protest, and you can see this on YouTube, where there were women in all these groups. I assume that there were protesting Warren Farrell's talk at the university, and it was quite violent. They were pushing these men. They're quite. There was this hostility against the men's rights movement, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's. I'm not a huge men's rights advocate. I believe that these things can be determined by respect for individual rights, right? I believe the feminist movement is a result of a wider cultural Marxist position. But I do believe that that you will have these militant groups, and I think that they will gain a lot of power in the culture. And I think that they may not, you may not have Catherine McKinnon's and others who are going to be able to impose it, and not completely, but you're still going to have them. We don't know. There's one thing about markets and competition and stuff that you learn with Austrian economics, right? Is that you don't know what will result as a result of interplay in the market, right?
Right.
There's lots of things that will change. That's the great thing about competition. But then if you have competition in law, you're going against you're actually, there's a lot of irrationality in the culture. So feminism being an example of that. You know, radical Marxism in other areas, environmentalism. You have militant ethnic groups, Aboriginal groups that want to violate individual rights. You're kind of opening up the argument. This is where Rand talks about statism being an implementation of gang warfare. I would argue that the position that you end up in an anarchist society is that you have a total breakdown, because you have to have lawmaking. And what happens when you have two examples where you have two differing perspectives on the law? Whose position is going to dominate? I'm saying the position about life, liberty, and property being protected, so long as, you know, with your consent, right? I mean, you cannot violate it. Period.
You're muted, Robert. You're still not on.
More of these problems.
Try that now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. The thing that I want to bring, I want to address this point, and then have us move on to some other ones. The thing that I would bring to your point is that if we accept the idea that there is going to be a government that that is in charge of this government is not immutable.
No.
It is victim to the tragedy of the commons when it comes to a democracy or a representative republic. If it has a monarchy or whatever, it can have a benevolent dictator or a malevolent dictator. And each and every single one of these models still falls prey to the problem that you're talking about. That there can be a ruler or a group of rulers or a ruling body who creates rules that are stupid, that are bad. Okay?
Right.
And it doesn't resolve what it is that you're talking about. Okay, these problems exist regardless. And if we have a government, and let's say it's a democracy or a representative democracy, these particular power groups that have crazy, stupid ideas can use their power and influence of their their big voices to take advantage of that system and manipulate it to cause bad things to go into effect. Whereas in an anarchist environment where you have competition for the provision of lawmaking, they have to actually foot the bill themselves for what it is that they're trying to do. And it's a very expensive proposition to go into these stupid things when everybody who you're trying to screw over with these laws has a vested interest in investing in the law not happening and vacating that law. And so by having each person's particular interest be financially responsible upon themselves for these particular services, you avoid the problems.
Really? Climate change. Let me pick up. Let's talk about climate change. You have the Canadian Council of Chief Executives in Canada. Okay, you have thousands who claim to represent thousands of chief executives. You have situations where they're trying. There's a war against fossil fuels, and so they're pushing, I think, an irrational war against fossil fuels, and they'll be able to afford it. They'll be able to have a justice agency, which will be able to impose all types of draconian ideas, taxes on carbon. You know, I mean, the fact that there's about 1 million people that can't get access to an actual electrical grid right now in the world, where they're without power. It's horrible. Yet we have environmentalists, you know, rich bourgeois types in Western democracies who are trying to stop shale gas and this whole movement towards and in a lot of ways energy. We won't have to be worried about a bunch of crazies in the Middle East with oil, right? We could actually have that oil in North America and such. But there's a lot of irrational ideas. And Robert, I find your position totally naive. You think that, again, safety in numbers, that somehow this is going to miraculously be solved, but the objectivist perspective is that you have to have, retaliatory use of force has got to be under objective control, and you have to have this sort of thing determined rationally at the government level. And I think that, yes, governments are, you know, they're subject to the same problems. You're correct, but you make the burden of proof is on you, and in a sense you have a greater faith in this idea of all these multiple justice agencies going to be able to solve the problem. This is just completely ludicrous. It's,
okay.
And most people outside of a small handful of crazies actually accept this. I think it's just pure lunacy.
Okay, first of all, you're shifting the burden of proof onto me, and
of course.
the fact is that we know from experience that there have been societies where every single one of the things that you think the government should provide has been provided in a free market, non-government based system. Whether it be roads, whether it be military, whether it be policing, whether it be all of these different things have been done in various different societies throughout history without having been done by governments. And they did not have some of the same problems that you see in government systems. They didn't have gigantic wars against countries because they happen to have oil. They didn't have gigantic wars against other countries because they happen to have a lot of tea or whatever. So the idea that it is the burden of the person whose system, which has been tested in a variety of different aspects, that worked without causing these problems, should be replaced with a system that we've seen every single time. I
want to know how you're going to deal with a situation where a girl is in a family where they want to she can't get out of an Islamic tyranny that she's in the household, right? They want to impose
Sharia law.
strict religious edicts. There are girls that live in prisons in their homes because they can't. There's a famous case in Canada, Shafea sisters or whatever. The whole it was a horrible tragedy, and I can't see how in an anarchist system that wouldn't have been okay, because I mean they could have their justice agency could defend them and say like you have the legal right to be able to do that to their own daughter. Right?
We don't make the claim that we can solve all problems.
Yeah, but you're not looking at the way the world is right now. There is no-go zones in parts of Europe where they have total control. That to me is anarchy right there. You have situations in Canada
It's
where there
chaos.
are no-go zones in Caledonia where people are being abused. By they can't. There's a property rights argument there where the government isn't stepping in to defend the rights of Caledonians because of the native occupation issue, because they're too worried about political correctness to step in to enforce the rule of law. So I think that the problem is that just like anarchists, just like libertarians, want to talk about politics in isolation, and they want to talk about it without the understanding of the metaphysics, the epistemology, and ethics. And I think that the ethics is what's missing here. Is it or what you've decided to embrace is a subjective form of ethics, where the choice issue becomes I'm going to choose my arbiter that's going to be able to impose my particular will on somebody else, particular whim, and whether it be a mystical, religious, Sharia law, whether it be somebody, some radical feminist, whether whatever the views are, they're going to be given a license with your particular views.
Okay.
And so you're good at
They already have
attacking
license.
governments.
They already have license, even though we have a government. Okay.
I
They already
agree.
exist.
I
Okay.
agree that the government
Not
isn't
like if
enforcing things, but to the extent that it is, you see, that's another thing too. You don't focus on some of the positives, right? There are people that are in jail. Paul Bernardo is in jail. I think he should, there should, Carla shouldn't have got out. But the thing is, I can't see how Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo would have been in jail in an anarchist system. I mean,
they
if they
likely
had the
wouldn't.
money, if they had the ability to be able to pay for a justice agency, maybe they wouldn't have been able to get away with it.
They likely wouldn't. They probably would be dead in all likelihood. But
Well, I agree that they should have been dead. We've been
well,
agreeing.
in an anarchist society, then that's certainly would have been a possibility. But we're always playing the well, could have, would have, we don't know, we can only guess kind of thing when we're dealing with these philosophical questions. Okay. Now, my position is that if you have a system that is considered to be sanctioned to make law and make rules that have no burden of proof or burden of expenditure of funds in order to create them, borne by the people who are creating those laws and rules, then you create more negative externalities. Okay. Now, your position is that by having one particular group of people in charge of making these particular rules, who can externalize all of the costs of creating these rules, who can externalize all the losses that all these rules create, is somehow a good thing. And I don't understand how that works, but I think that we've kind of beaten this particular horse enough. I did want to go on to a question that I had for you, as far as a potential argument that you didn't make, which I wonder if you think of it as a good argument.
Mm-hmm.
Am I a fly in the wall so far?
Yeah, jump in there.
Maybe I can do my laundry now.
Sorry, let me I'll ask you this, or I'll have you respond to it and see what you think, Victor. All right.
Okay.
In the case of a situation where we have a woman who is in dire threat, where there is a gang of hoodlums that is accosting her, we know that she may have risk of loss of life, liberty, property, something of those lines. You're in a situation where you can steal a tool that will help you prevent the infraction or harm from befalling this particular woman. Now, pragmatically, this is an obvious choice that you can make, and you can prevent her suffering by breaking the rules. So, is that not similar to the use of taxation to prevent a greater harm of an invasion of a foreign force, foreign powers, or the use of force to take monies to prevent worse loss through criminal activity by creating laws, like he is saying? What do you think?
Victor?
Look at I'm not coming to this discussion with who's going to pick the cotton and who's going to build the roads kind of questions. Wayne is an objectivist. He speaks in terms of principles.
Right.
He's bringing to the table pragmatism. What about? What about? What about? I can't. He knows as well as I do that he's not a statist in the sense of opposing all these problems and pushing it all onto the anarchist or even the constitutionally limited government guy, because even the constitutional limited Ayn Rand government guy will be asked about, well, what about education? What about the poor? What about the infirm? What about the old? What about the roads? What about? What about? What about? What about? But now he's bringing his own what about? What about? What about to the table. I want to talk about fundamental philosophical principles. Hello, 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 principles. I want to know how this government, which is only an aggregate of people, where that consent comes from. Now, I am, we'll put it this way, I am a political atheist. Okay, the burden of proof is not on me, who's advocating freedom. And I'm not talking about the conflicting views of how everybody. What does that mean? How do we define freedom? What does that mean? We know what freedom means. The objectivists know what freedom means. The anarchist, the modern-day anarchist, the works of Stefan Molyneux and so forth, knows what freedom is. It's freedom from physical aggression. Period. You apply individual rights and the non-aggression principle consistently throughout life. That applies to all human beings, and even that cadre of human beings that call themselves government. Now we can see that as equal and free human beings, all men are created equal. In that sense, that we're born free. This institution called government, which is just an aggregate of people, what gives them some kind of different rights, opposing rights, and where does that consent come from that they and only they will be the final arbiters of what justice means? The Randian approach to objectivism is not from a Thomas Hobbes position, where in an anarchist state, people for the most part are pretty nasty. He has a whole very negative view towards human nature, so that people left to their own devices, life would be nasty, brutish, and short. That kind of view is just taken as a given, and he's building upon a question that has to be asked ahead of time, is to ask, what is the nature of a human being? The John Locke approach is that for the most part human beings are decent. They would choose good rather than bad. Therefore, to leave this state of nature and to move towards what is called society, they would delegate their rights. People delegate their rights to this institution government to protect individual rights so that all can live optimally. That is the John Locke approach. Now, this is to speak very beneficially of human nature, because we realize that in a case of where our passions can get the better of us when some kind of wrong was done against us, we realize that, so therefore we want to delegate our rights to the government. And so therefore you have the consent of the government, and this is where the social contract gears into it. But that is ridiculous, and that's a question that I'd like to ask Wayne, if he subscribes to this social contract theory. Because the anarchist could very well say, or the libertarian could very well say, I never signed no contract. Right. It's a mystical floating abstraction. The people migrate. There's lives. There's births, and people go on and on and on. How do you keep on securing this consent? How does the ruling elite keep on gaining this consent? This mystical consent. It's right. I guess it's probably in Plato's Platonic forms, right next door to original sin. I guess that's where the social contract theory is, right? So, but we know by the nature of the beast Never mind how government should be. Let's just talk about definitions.
Well,
Let's go back to basic philosophy.
Victor, you posed a question. Let's go ahead and get an answer,
Okay.
if you would. But first, did you want you preferred the term lawmaking as being that they are the final creators of law, but that you could have different arbitrations per se. So I guess you would modify your question then, Victor, that who gives them the authority to declare that these are the laws, and then that is where do they get their authority to declare these laws?
Yes, it's consent of the governed. Now, if
Well, no, let's ask him that question. Let's actually ask him that question.
social contract theory, and how is this consent given?
Well, I'm not. I know the social contract theory. I've read Second Truths of Government a while back, but I know there's a Rousseauian perspective on it with the general will, grand legislator, and such. But obviously, I advocate that you develop rights based on human nature, and so a respect for humans as rational entities that can make choices and determine their lifelong range. And so consent is based on one's nature as a rational being. And so I used the example before about obviously we do this in law, right? So if someone has advanced dementia or whatever, they have to have sort of a contract to basically power of attorney, over that individual, so that they can't make certain decisions. So we already have in law now how to deal with certain people, and we understand its rationality to the extent that where rights are, right? So we have a grasp of that. So I believe that in objectivism and in influencing government and how governments ought to protect individual rights, life, liberty, and property, and cannot be violated, but with your consent, only with your consent. That's the basis for law, and that the Freedom Party's position, education, healthcare, we believe that there should be competition with a lot of these services, right? So we believe that there should be choice in education, choice in healthcare, and so compete with the model and allow people to make their choices. So choice isn't a bad thing. Choice in the marketplace is a very good idea, right? But to me, you're distorting. Objectivism is about concepts of a hierarchical nature. But you see, I think that you've stolen, or it's a sort of a stolen concept here when you're using choice, but you're denying its genetic roots, which is the idea that someone cannot choose to have an arbitration organization or you want to call them DROs, what the hell you want to call these things, that violate rights. And that's the problem. As soon as you let the genie out of the bottle, you're going to have a situation where you're going to have two different lawmakers. Let's say they're deciding on a particular law. I don't know. Let's say the legal age for drinking. I don't know. Maybe there's got to be like an age where we set it, right? So how do you determine where two defense agencies differ? How is the public going to be able to make a decision whose defense agency's law is correct? Because as soon as you open it up to a plethora of possibilities, right? To me, that's a major danger there. I see someone's raising their hand.
Yeah. Rothschild, go for it.
Yeah, how does the government
I
determine?
hope at some point for my question to actually be answered. But go ahead in the meantime.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer it. How does government determine what is right and wrong? How does government determine what is just or non-just? Either of these things can be found in nature and the appeal to reason and through epistemology, sort of what the objectivist philosophy claims, or it's just whatever is right is what government determines is right. And then that's very, very dangerous, because then you can have a dictatorship where people aren't thinking for themselves what is right and wrong, what is ethical. They just say, well, whatever the government says is right. So there has to be some objective for the government to determine it. To just say, well, let the government decide is, based on what criteria?
Yeah, they have an exclusivity on epistemology too, apparently.
So
So,
have you seen any other? Are you now saying that? Like I think John Searle's arguments are pretty good, and he's an analytic philosopher. But you know, again, if you're making a claim, I don't think that that's true. I don't definitely think that objectivists are the only ones that have a monopoly. I quoted Robert Nozick and some of Nozick's arguments. I do think that there are a lot of other good arguments out there outside of just objectivists. But again, the anarchist is stuck in a worse problem. I agree. We're going to agree here on one point that the governments of today are like organized criminal gangs. That they're not.
But yet you trust them. Yet you trust them with such power. So why don't we just give Charles Manson?
You do too, though. You do too. You
no,
do
I don't.
too. If someone, yes, you do.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I've never called the police in my life, and I don't intend to.
Okay. Well, maybe you've never been tested at that point. But you know, there's.
Let's get Charles Manson military.
There's lots of people who have gone to jail for theft and stuff. Like if you owned a store, you're telling me you would just let the guy go, or he's running down the street, or you chase him? But if you chase him and shoot him, and if you have a gun, then maybe you're going to have a lot more problems. Maybe you do call the cops, and maybe they search him out and they find him. Yeah, Victor's laughing, but that's. I mean, we all do.
You're against socialized medicine, but you're going to use it.
Well, yeah. Well, this is true. Yeah, that's true.
But I'm not sure you're answering my question.
But I don't think government should be involved in medicine, obviously. But I do believe.
I'm not sure you're answering my question. My question is, if we need a government to decide what is just law, how does government determine what the law ought to be?
Well, as I said, it's the law is determined by, you know, it depends on what the law is, but that's an abstract question. It's protecting. No, I'm going to say that there's obviously laws that need to be on the books about protecting particular noise laws, noise factors. You may have to have, you know, enforce some type of statute within certain area. I mean, should someone be able to take a TV or, you know, have in their backyard, have this huge mega screen TV and blast noise all over the community and keep everybody up or whatever? I mean, there's obviously going to be bylaws passed and stuff like that where you need, you know, certain laws to be in, and that's what government will do. But the thing is, you try to solve the problem by making it far worse. That's the thing. I mean, yes, I agree that this is
but how am I making it far worse? In order for the idea that laws emerge just based on fiat is complete and utter bullshit. Laws emerge through what Hayek called a spontaneous order. They emerge through based on experience. They don't just emerge by a bunch of people saying this is what the rule is going to be. And it's not. And if you have privatized arbitration, a court system isn't going to just say this is what the ruling is going to be. If it's a ruling that the majority don't accept, if it's a ruling that's completely and utterly absurd, they're not going to be in business very long because they come across as just a capricious governing law-making body that just imposes arbitrary, insane laws. So in order for laws to be enforced, they have to have some recognition that these laws make sense.
Do you think it's spontaneous order? So it's sort of an evolutionary. Again, you've taken Hayek's view, which is the reason. It's a Humean view, right? So Hume argued that reason doesn't belong in morality. So you're basically agreeing that morality is subjective.
I'm not saying morality is subjective.
You are. You have to. I would suggest you watch David Kelly's talk on the difference between Hayek and Rand on abstraction. Just on the phone here.
I don't believe morality is subjective, which is why I'm against the state. Morality is subjective. Who says theft is wrong? Who says violence is wrong? If morality is subjective, then it's just another way of saying that I have no morals. Because if morality is subjective, then anything goes. And why oppose anything?
Well, how are you going to oppose it? That's the whole point. It's evolution. It's the evolution of the ideas, right? So it's an evolutionary perspective on rights and on morality.
Right, but government does not have a monopoly on what is moral and what is just, right?
No.
Okay, so we don't need a government to monopolize what they think is just on everyone else.
No, we do need.
What?
We do need to. We do need that. Obviously, I mean, you have governments, Sharia law in other parts of the world, and that's irrational. We both agree that it's irrational.
Right, but that's right, but that's not anarchy. That's government enforcing irrational laws on everyone else.
But those are tribes. Those tribes became governments. You'll never be able to have a situation where you don't have some type of a law, right? And so that law, if you're going to agree that it's irrational and it should be outlawed, then you're going to have to impose that by force, because you're going to have a situation in culture around the world right now. There are immigration.
Right. I'm not against force.
Not against it in a retaliatory use.
Right.
Right. So why not put that in an objective law?
I am. But first of all, you can have objective
because
law.
You're having choice. As soon as you have choice,
what do you mean? Choosing your arbitrator is different than choosing what the law is. You know, I can choose where I buy pizza. Look, there's an objective law on what determines what pizza is. Pizza is made from certain ingredients. So, you know, pizza isn't a car. So you have an objective law on what is determined pizza. That doesn't mean we need a monopoly on to make pizza. I'm not choosing what is considered pizza. I'm choosing where I buy the pizza.
And this is
what the law is.
This is another issue.
Who my arbitrator is.
Yeah, Daniel, the point's taken. And the whole point here is the whole point of the Constitution was not to have a concentration of power. The Founding Fathers tried to disperse power.
Mm-hmm.
Right, they did a very shitty job, but yes.
So that's the whole point of a DRO, is not to have pluralistic laws that says on the one hand that you can sew up your daughter's pussy in Sharia law or something like that, and then over here you can have where individual rights is being protected. We're talking about dispersing power. You cannot give exclusive power or allot it to a small handful of people and expect them to behave reasonably. Power corrupts. To take Acton's principle there, that absolute power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. No piece of paper called the Constitution for people who seize power. A government throughout all of history has only established itself and maintains itself by initiating force. That's a government. That is a generic definition of government, and no constitution.
You want to initiate. You want to have force in a particular geographical area. You want to. If you said to me in our last, my question to you in the last debate that we had, I asked you, would you outlaw the organizations like the Sharia courts and such? And you said they would never exist. No one would choose them. But that's patently false. That's fantasy land. You're suggesting for 1 minute that people wouldn't choose these rational courts? Of course they would. Of course they would. They were trying to impose. We can only hope for a critical mass. We can only hope for a society where enough people support the ideas and support it to an extent. Even during the Enlightenment, there were irrational ideas, right? So you have this sort of things.
Right, but the only way to get people not supporting Sharia law is not by opposing a state. The way to get it is by persuading people that Sharia law is against their self-interest. If the solution is just to have a state, why not have a one-world government? Prevent the possible Arab governments from imposing Sharia law. That'll solve the problem. Let's just have a one-world government now, and we don't have to worry about all these insane governments, because the American government is so wise and great that we don't. That in order to prevent Sharia law, we just have a one-world government saying you can't oppose Sharia law there.
Well, you bring up a very good point, because the world has tons of governments right now. So if you want different laws and different forms of law, why don't you just go to a
I never said I want different laws. I never said I want different laws. I want different. I want to choose my arbitrator. I never said I want different laws.
You still have the problem of being in a geographical area among other people. And as Nozick points out in Anarchist State Utopia, it's very true. You're going to have a situation where somebody joins a particular defense agency and their procedures are unreliable or totally mystical, and you're going to have a situation where you have to deal with that individual. So
the argument against
precedence wins over yours? Is it your defense agency or their defense?
The argument. Hold on, Zach Cody. I'll let you talk. The argument against a one-world government is that the more decentralized something is, the more options you have. It's why state rights are better than the federal government imposing its law in all 50 states. Not because states are more wise or more ethical than the federal government, but because it's easier to move from one state to the next than to move from an entire country. So decentralization is ideal. And I would say that free rights are ideal.
Wasn't slavery a result of states' rights? Or am I wrong on that?
Was what? Slavery?
Yes, slavery. You had slavery.
Slavery would have ended like that if the government didn't subsidize slavery through the Fugitive Slave Act.
Wasn't a situation? How would have a situation where you have enough dominant people within that particular state that want to impose slavery? What do you have a situation where you have? Are you gonna have, as I said with Victor, you're gonna have a federal sort of web of agreements among all your defense agencies to act as a monopoly to shut down organizations that violate life, liberty, and property, or are you gonna have a situation where you're gonna have gang war and civil war, as the objectivist perspective is, right?
So do you support the neo-composition of, look, all these dictators, they're terrible, they're oppressing their people. America should go and stop it. America should stop these dictators who are attacking people.
Well, I do think
you can't just let them do it, right?
Well, you have a situation. You're going to have a situation where you can't operate from an isolationist perspective. The world doesn't operate that way. You're going to have to go to the countries where there's state-sponsored terrorists, and you're going to have to go in and deal with that, right? So I don't think the Bush doctrine did it correctly, but I think that you do have a situation where you're going to have to go to those countries and hunt them down. The Barbary Pirates was a perfect example in the second presidency of Jefferson, where he fought. First, he got the authorization of Congress to actually do that, right? So that I think that's totally legitimate. We have a situation where if off the Straits of Gibraltar, you had raising ladders, and they had to be quiet.
I think it's perfectly legitimate to defend yourself against anyone who is imposing violence on you. Sharia law is imposing violence on you. Therefore, it's perfectly within your power to prohibit it because it is an act of aggression, right? Sharia law isn't a victimless crime, right? Part of Sharia law is if you charge someone interest, you get thrown in jail.
Right.
So I get thrown in jail for charging someone interest? How is that? That's a violent coercive. So preventing Sharia law is only saying we're not going to allow you to throw someone into jail for charging someone else interest.
Well, keep in mind that what we're talking about here is, as far as the differences between an anarchist society and a constitutional society, the way that they deal with a foreign power that has different rules, different laws, and so on is significantly different. But the idea that that we wouldn't have that would be lacking intervention in these foreign powers and their activities is not true. I mean, the fact is that when you have trade with other countries, when you have trade between individuals, you also have the opportunity for influencing them in their positions. And being able to, let's say, for example, offer somebody who lives in a Sharia law environment a job in a non-Sharia law environment where if they move, now they're free from that. And so the idea of ending the state of Islam or whatever of Sharia law and ending those policies, that can be done through trade and through providing alternatives and basically getting all the people who are subjects of it to expatriate, so to speak.
But what if there's a bunch of Muslim families that are living in your particular geographical area, and that they have a situation where they want to be able to perform barbarous practices on their daughter? Could they not go to some type of Sharia court and then have that imposed on?
They would have their own. They would have their own property.
It's funny, Wayne, how you consider anarchy or utopia, but all your criticisms are essentially. What if one group of people act badly? Yeah, that's not.
It's not just acting badly. It's just the way the world is now.
I'd like to interject here. First of
Go
all,
ahead.
we already have that situation right now with mass circumcision throughout North America. So arguing against Sharia law is kind of ridiculous with what we have. Anyway, I want to get back to my point, which was actually Victor's point, which is where does the consent come from for a government? Now, we've discussed maybe how to approach certain groups of people who have laws within their culture that we find abhorrent. And one of the arguments that Daniel made is that we need to convince these people of what we feel is ethical and the things that we agree on as being abhorrent, and we need to bring these people to a better understanding of ethics. But the consent that you're asking for a single government, doesn't that require that same convincing of every single individual to get consent? Because in order to have consent, you have to have choice. You cannot have consent without choice. So if there's only one government, only one person for arbitration or lawmaking or whatever, there cannot be consent. You cannot consent if there's only one choice. So I'm just curious as to Victor's question to you, which I'm still trying to figure out what your answer is to it.
Well, I'm not trying to. I'm with the Freedom Party, so I'm
not trying to attack you personally, but I'm still not. I just still haven't heard an answer to the question though. Where does consent come from, and how can it be considered consent if there's only one choice?
Well, there are choices in Ontario politics. I mean, people choose the Freedom Party or they don't. But you're going to have a situation where you're educating the populace on particular views, right? And so they're going to vote for the particular the values. And
isn't that argument just as valid for a free market society that we're advocating for? I mean, the exact same sentence you just said would be that in order to advocate for a certain set of laws, we need to convince the market, which is people, individuals.
Right. But
it's the exact same argument that you just used.
Yeah, but once we get into power, once the Freedom Party or a particular government gets into power, the idea is that you have laws that are based on protecting life, liberty, and property. That there should not be laws that violate life, liberty, and property. That they don't. That's wrong. That they don't. They should not exist. There should be no such thing as positive rights, right? So to basically, a right to health care, a right to this, all these sort of things, which are violations of rights, and we can all agree on that. But
I do have a question for you then to expand on that. If we have a government system, let's just take any one in history and we examine it. Can you find one that did not create positive rights?
That did not
create positive rights.
I guess the United States in the beginning, right? I mean,
but it did create positive rights using the same government that was initially established. Maybe under the Articles of Confederation, that system may not have caused these things. Do you think that is the case? That had they stayed with the Articles of Confederation, that we wouldn't have seen the creation of positive rights?
I'm not certain on that, because I know that from what I understand, is the Constitution was that the Articles of Confederation didn't have enough power to basically there was not enough power within the states to enforce it. So you needed a constitution to basically push for protection. That's why you had support for the Constitution.
Okay, well, I would say that this is that even in the Articles of Confederation, which was basically it was like the Constitution, but without all the federalism, that
it was superior, in fact.
Yeah, but even then, it created positive rights. It created the positive right of a legislator to be able to pass a law that everyone else had to follow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, that is a positive right. I make a statement that this is the rules, and you have to follow them. It's not a statement that I do not accept you doing something to me, and if you do, then I will use force to stop you, which would be a negative right. And so this government, every single government, all governments create positive rights and therefore violate your own rules of natural law.
I want to stress this is not what governments do. This is what a government is.
Yeah, yeah, it is in its nature a creation of a positive right by its establishment.
From how you're explaining it, I don't think that that's necessarily a wrong thing, in the sense that I should be able to stop or prevent, positively stop or prevent somebody from performing clitorectomies on their daughter, or honor killings, or these sort of things. I mean, these are things that should be positively prevented within the culture.
But okay. That is not a positive right. Okay, what is a positive?
That's a negative right. I know that's a negative. That's in the sense of our classic understanding of
responding to the use of force against a person who cannot defend themselves would be a defensive action. It is not the initiation of force. However, passing any law that says you can't use any currency other than the one that we provide, or you can't use any arbitration service other than the Supreme Court as your final arbiter, is a positive right. Okay, every single one of these things creates a positive right. Government in itself is a positive right that says we make the rules. Not you get to choose who.
Now, but who determines what the rules are? And you've answered that, right? That the determination of those rules.
Then we go into another question, though.
Right.
I would like for you to I don't know if you're an atheist or not.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Now, obviously, you would say to a person who was of a religious nature that if we didn't have God, we would all be immoral, as being a fallacy.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So, if we didn't have a lawmaker called government, that we wouldn't have law, would also be an equivalent fallacy.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, there's a situation where you need to have law within the culture, right? There is a need for enforcing right and wrong.
Let me repeat what I just said. Okay.
Right.
The fallacy that if without God we would all be immoral because God is morality is a fallacious argument. The same thing is true of saying without government we wouldn't have law, because we know how to make law without government. It's been done. It's called maritime law. Okay?
Tort law, common law.
Tort law, common law. All of these laws do exist. In fact, I would ask you to look at language and how the rules of language and the appropriate use of speech in order to communicate have created certain rules, like you have verbs and you have subjects, and these create sentences, and then you can communicate effectively. Now, obviously, there's breakdowns in it as far as some vernacular that is kept in one area or whatever, but this was entirely organic and created through spontaneous order, that we created these fairly complex rules for how to communicate with each other. But they still work, even if they have some slight breakdowns from time to time, because people like to mix up words. E. Cummings was a crazy man, whatever. But we still understand how to communicate in some fashion or form, and we understand the basic rules behind it. And common law also does the same kind of thing, where we can obviously see that if someone takes someone's cattle, this is considered, rustling, and it is not acceptable in common law. So the idea that we have to have a godhead called government in order to create law is not true. We've seen that, right?
But I've given you examples where it ends up being subjective, because all types of organizations will determine what they believe is a violation of law.
The same is true under a government. Why do you assume you have objective law under government?
but we can go into that argument at another point in time, Daniel.
Well, it's relevant to this discussion.
It is relevant, but the question then comes up. Then, if we have had the freedom to create language over the course of time, where we didn't have a language dictator who told us what language is appropriate or what language isn't appropriate, or how language should work, but it actually organically made itself through the use of it in people's lives. Do you not think that by having a society where the expectation of law to come from the understanding of mutual agreements would create rules that are actually adhered to by and large by everyone, even though they originally started off as subjective, that this order will actually eventually come to be, which is called common law, that these will actually be objective rules that could be enforced. So it's not that...
That would be superfluous to have more than one monopoly then at that point. Then when you're agreeing that if it's common law, that means it should be enforced.
But it's not superfluous, because what happens is technology changes, people's preferences change. Let's say that we come to a point where we can actually, I don't know, let's say use a printer, a 3D printer, to print things from at an atomic level, using any element that we want. Okay. Well, the laws that are about, let's say, water rights would change. Okay. And it would change based upon the subjective needs in a particular market on those water rights that they might have had. And so it evolves and changes according to what the social pressures are and what the market bears. And this is where you will find that by having the results be organically derived through periods of testing, and by people having to pay their own costs and their own prices for their bad actions and their own desires for a particular law to be in place. Like, let's say you wanted to prohibit anyone from selling alcohol to someone who's 12. Well, in order to do that, you have to foot the bill to make that into law. Whereas if I'm a person who wants to sell alcohol to 12-year-olds, then what costs do I have? Well, I've got to be able to let them get in, and that means that if somebody wants to travel on the road to get to my place of business, there's all these different interactions economically as far as making that feasible and viable. So by making each person individually accountable for their own financial risks and their financial losses, you create what ends up being a final, like, I mean, it's not even final. I mean, it's a transitory but objective, way that rules work.
And I agree with all of that, but at the same time, I can agree with that, and at the same time say that you still need a monopoly on the use of force. That there needs to be a final arbiter, and that arbiter needs to be.
Okay, can I object on that one?
All of that could be true. I mean, there could be some truth to some of that.
Okay, Victor?
Okay, yeah, regarding this final arbiter, I don't want to be misunderstood. Okay, first of all, we still have this serious issue here of retaining this word government, and the whole social contract theory. All that has to be answered to, I think. But if we're to have this government, which in the Randian model of voluntary contributions to this government, because taxes are forced, okay, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. If it was all voluntary right from the get-go, I don't need multiple defense agents. I'm fine with one. I'm fine with one. If that defense agency, or government as you want to call it, was held together in check by the actual consent of the people, where you might have a natural monopoly because they're holding their job by merit, by sheer merit, that people figure that nobody can compete with them because they're doing their job so well. But in that sense, though, if it was voluntary contributions to the government, this talk about voluntary taxation is an oxymoron, and I don't know why you can't see that. this would just become another business on the market offering the services of arbitration.
And
That's all it would
services.
be. Voluntary contributions to the government, that's called payment for a service rendered. But Rand is trying to just dilute all this language, because I think that she probably would have realized if she was on shaky anarchistic ground, so that she has to come up with this ridiculous oxymoric language of voluntary taxations. It's payment for a service, and if that's voluntary payment, that's offering a legitimate service such as arbitration and contracts and people who are violating rights. And if they just held their place in the market by sheer merit, well, I'm fine with that. That's fine with that. That'd be a natural monopoly, but I just highly doubt it, though. I just highly doubt it.
So how about everybody else on the panel? Does everybody, if there was an objectivist government, the one that, you know, the Freedom Party advocates, the objectivist view of government, would you be fine with that kind of a government?
No.
But it's not a government, though.
Well, I'm just saying, would you be all fine with that?
The way that it was.
Yeah.
To clarify the question, are you saying, all right, let's just assume that we have a monopoly on the provision of arbitration because this particular group has been able to convince people to voluntarily fund it, and this service has done sufficiently well in providing this service that people are actually quite happy to fund it.
And no competitor or would-be competitors are that tried to enter the field that just couldn't. They just weren't up to mustard. You know, like the first defense agency is. Which we have to remove the word government here because it's not a government. Voluntary taxation, so-called, be voluntary payment
we got
for
that.
the provision of arbitration. Okay, yeah. So it would just become another service on a market. That's all it would be.
So Cody, I mean, if we had a monopoly which occurred through basically outperforming any potential competitors and creating such a good service that competitors did not bother to try to compete, would you be okay with that?
Here's the thing is, yes, the way it was just lined out for me on the surface, I would be okay with that. However, I don't believe it could exist. I don't believe that the market would allow for a natural monopoly. I don't think it can happen because if you are truly in a monopoly, you're going to abuse that power. It's going to happen, and we've seen that happen with artificial, monopolies that are put out there. Comcast pisses me off, but I have to use them, and so I don't believe that in a free society a monopoly can exist for very long. So if it naturally arose, then yes, the way it's posed to me, then I would not have a problem with that. I just don't believe it can exist.
Well, yeah, of course it can exist. It's more of a rhetorical question, really, because if we live in a free society that has competing currencies, and there's no compulsory schooling, the state really is just a state of mind. So you take away the money supply being exclusive domain of one institution, and compulsory schooling, the state is gone. It's toast. It's flatlined.
Okay, and then Rothschild, what do you think about the idea that if you had a company that provided arbitration that was doing such a fine job of it that nobody else bothered to enter the field, is that okay?
I agree with Cody. It wouldn't exist. So, am I okay with something that's never going to exist? I guess, because it's not going to be a problem. That's like saying, are you okay with a fountain of youth that'll make people live forever? Well, never going to happen. So, why not? If it'll shut people up, sure. It's on the graph to be tested. In answer, Wayne, to your question of, well, if we're going to have a universal law, why can't we have a monopoly? Well, I think there are a few reasons. One, let's say the monopoly is immoral. Let's say the monopoly is abusive, right? I mean, one of the reasons against monopolies in general are that they are overpriced and offer shoddy services. Why not? Guaranteed payment through taxation, no competitors. I'm not offering you good product because you have to buy it, and I'm the only one offering it. So I'm not really going to do a good job in terms of quality. And, you know, the reason government typically is so bad isn't because people in government are stupid. It's because they really have no incentive to offer a good product when they're getting paid either way, and when they have no, and when competition is forbidden. So, you know, I would say that that the government. I mean, one of the main problems with a monopoly of force is, let's say you have a dispute with the government, right? I have a dispute with the Supreme Court, or I have a dispute when I'm fucked. Because if we have a dispute, if I steal your watch, and a relative of mine is the judge, are you getting a fair trial? If a friend, oh, no, they're going to say you gave it to him. It was a gift. So the problem with a monopoly a court system is that if there's ever a dispute between you and the monopoly is going to side with itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so seeing that we're running out of time, I did want to bring up a question that just kind of like finalizes, I guess, the point for us. We talked about the idea of if we had one world government and so on. Well, why would it be government? Because the idea, to me, I mean, wouldn't you have to have one person being the final arbiter, a single individual person? Because otherwise, you have competing arbitration.
Is this to me?
Yes.
Question.
Oh, I do think that you need a government within a particular geographical area, and the whole world is it's ridiculous. It's like there's an omniscience problem with that. You can't. There's so many different areas and different factors, and
so the lack of information would be an issue. Would be an issue.
And even in Canada, we have a provincial, municipal, and federal government. So we have and you know you have.
Wait, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
You know, there are people who may want to piss in food. There are people who may want to spit in food and may want to put poison in food. So in order to prevent this, we're going to have a monopoly on food because we can't risk someone else pissing in the food and spitting it and poisoning it.
Right. Yeah, but you see, when I go to there's an implicit property, there's a contract, implicit contract, when I go into a restaurant, that they're going to do their best to actually ensure that that food is clean. We do have health inspectors that go around to various restaurants, and we have conditional passes or whatever. You can see those signs in Toronto all the time about what is if that particular restaurant is a good restaurant to go into. If anything, in a sense, this is where there's been some efficiency done by having enforcement of contracts, an implicit contract by government. And I don't see how that that could be very different according to, like, we would have kosher laws. Jews have kosher laws. You have a particular so some parts of the world they eat dog. So you have different standards ethnically for different areas. So in a city like Toronto, where you have such diversity, it makes sense to impose a particular standard, a rational standard, on all of these restaurants to say, here are the health standards that we've come to in a particular geographical area. You've just given me a very good argument against your position.
No. Wait, hold it.
Do you support government regulation of food?
I believe that there should be a protection of people's.
No.
Okay, let's since we got to wrap it up here on this. I mean, Wayne, you've got a point there that you're saying that because we need to have security and comfort in the idea of our food being quality.
It's initiating force against me if I eat something that makes me sick.
Right. Okay. So you're basically advocating for government regulators to go into restaurants to maintain certain health standards.
Exactly, because it's initiating force against me if I get sick.
No. Wait a minute.
If they intentionally spit my food, yeah, that's using force. I don't know what kind of disease you may have.
So Victor disagrees with you on this particular
I don't know
point.
what. Do you like people spitting your food, Victor?
No. I can't. The reason why I'm objecting so vociferously right here is that because you mean to tell me that Wayne Simmons, the Wayne Simmons that I know, the objectivist, free market freedom guy, doesn't realize, has all of a sudden has lost. Maybe it's because you've been a political candidate for too long. You're forgetting about Wayne Simmons, the philosopher of the free market, to realize that on a competing market, the profit motive is your driving force, not to poison your customers.
No,
okay,
I agree with you.
You don't need the government to tell you don't poison your customers. Now, the issue is that if that was done, then that would be a rights violated already committed,
Victor, I just gave an
where the
example.
government is supposed to step in and take care of the issue. But do you need a government to tell the people not to do that?
Yes.
What happened to
in some
what
cases
happened
you
to the
do.
free market?
Some people
What
have.
happened to the profit
During the
motive?
SARS epidemic, we had a SARS epidemic. There were certain people, certain communities that were affected more than others. And there's some health standards have to be enforced among communities. And you have to sort of say, this is why we even put signs in bathrooms that say, wash your hands before you walk out.
Don't poison my customers. The restaurant would enforce that.
No, not everybody has common sense. Not everybody has common sense. This is where you would have the industry, the health industry, the restaurant industry working with, the health inspectors provided by government, which are enforcing contracts. And this is an enforced contract. If someone spits my food or just has unhygienic cleaning areas, they have cockroaches running all over the place. I mean, you need to have enforced standards. And that, again, proves my point that if you had anarchism, you may have situations where you have lobbies sort of saying, we do things a certain way. This is how our culture, this is the way we want to do it.
You do realize that the government...
I realize you supported the FDA, Wayne.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
All right, so then we at this point we're going to have to call it short because we just have 2 more minutes left. I did want to have you have a chance to go ahead and respond to this point, and we'll make the last point. You objected to having the term statist being used.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so I would like for you to clarify what the word statist means to you.
Well, I agree that most governments around the world are organized criminal gangs. I don't even like to use the word government to describe them. I'd rather use the word, in a sense, state, and use the word government for rational, objective governance, right? So I think that the government that was best approximated in history is the United States government, with its constitution about the consent of the governed, and so that the government becomes the servant of the people, not its master, and it's a rule of laws, not a rule by men. And so I do think that the kind of government and I do think that I was saying a lot about the American Constitution. Victor did make a good point in one of his comments on Facebook, which is that obviously the United States government Constitution had flaws in it, and I would acknowledge that. I do believe that objectivism is a good, Ayn Rand, the objectivist philosophy will help government make it a moral, government. So yeah,
Okay.
but I would say statist is for those types of states which violate consent. And Rand even made it clear that it's about gangs. So it's obviously a pejorative term to us. And
Well,
so
Wayne, that puts us at the end of our time, and I apologize that we can't continue the conversation any longer, but that's the end of the show.
Thank you very much, Robert. It was really good.
Absolutely, I do want to thank everyone for joining us. We had Cody Limbaugh, we had Rothschild, Monsieur Daniel Rothschild, and Victor Pross, and Wayne Simmons all joining us. And thank you all for joining, and hope everyone will try to catch us next time on the Anarchist Experience. We will hopefully get our phone system working so that we can take calls and debate things like this further.